Hi everyone, Ricardo and I are back. With we're back with the we're back with the wrong background. Let's put the right background. See, because it matters. It's really important. If you don't have the right background, it's a problem. So anyway, we're back and we are going to continue what we started a couple of days ago. Well, it's been like 3 or 4 days now. Where we basically implement a remove post capability. What we really want to do, we want to truly allow people to remove the posts that they put on their social media accounts. If you're building a Taarufo, if you have an account on a Taarufo based instance, because anybody will be able to spin up their own instance. What we're really trying to do is that when you actually delete your post, it actually gets deleted, Ricardo. What do you think about that? How crazy is that? So it's not soft delete. It's not soft delete. It actually deletes the post and all the comments attached to it, and it's completely gone forever. Delete is a delete. If you want to delete, if I'm going to tell you, this is a part of just being an honest engineer. If you tell people that when they click on a button that's going to actually delete their post, then it should actually delete their post on the front end and the back end. That's part of being ethical, right? So
That's
anyway,
right.
right, that's what it is. So let me increase the screen here, size here for people who are on their phones, real quick, and then we're gonna continue that beautiful journey that you and I started, with other engineers, just to kind of get a feel of how we gonna implement the system. What I want to do basically, just for the guys watching us and for you, Ricardo, what I really want to do is to basically, even the very journey of building the software is worth documenting, and it's worth putting it out there so people can actually see who are the people that built that system, how they built it. We're not exactly just sitting in a basement eating pizza all day like Hollywood likes to draw us to be, and just I don't know. I love how in some of these movies, you'd be sitting down and they basically show you a guy just clicking a bunch of buttons real quick, and then he says, "I'm in, I'm in, I'm in." So anyway,
Expectation versus reality.
yes, that's right. That's right. All right, mostly Stack Overflow and Googling, right? So okay, so the last time you and I have been here, we have made a simple kind of round trip. We basically went and said, let me look in here. The last thing we did here, we basically went and said, okay, we have should remove post by ID async fail, and then we made this pass, right?
Mhm.
I'm gonna pick this up real quick. We're gonna do one more test today, one test, but we want to just think about what we're doing, okay? So here's what I want to do. If the ID that is being passed about that post is invalid, I need to tell people that that ID is invalid. All right. So this
Right.
is where it comes to the validation aspect. We did the processing part. The processing part is to go, let me find the implementation here. The processing part is to go in here and say, okay, you're passing an ID, right? And this ID, I will assume in all good intents in the world that the person passing that ID is passing a perfect ID, right? And that that ID actually matches, and I'm gonna go and find the post that matches that ID, and then I'm gonna go and delete that post based on what I find, right?
Happy path.
Happy path. So now let's go into the little sad path a little bit. Let's go and say, what if this post ID is bad? What should we
Mhm.
do? So here's the deal, my friend. I'm gonna go and write a failing test, right? I'm gonna create a new file from scratch here, and this new file is going to be called and I know the StreamYard doesn't really show you, and I need to kind of minimize also the window here. Let me just do this real quick. Post service tests dot validations dot retrieve by ID dot cs. Okay, so I created this guy right here. Okay, perfect. That's number one. I'm gonna minimize this screen because now the writing gets a little bit prettier. So look what I did here, Ricardo. I'm breaking these files on the right side here based on the category of work and the type of work. So the category here is that whether it's logic or validation or exception, there's nothing else any service could do, possibly, potentially, other than one of these three things. It's a tri nature of everything. Everything around us has some threes and threes and threes for some reason. I couldn't figure out why, but that's how these services are doing. You're either validating your input, doing something with that input, or throwing exceptions. Some issues are happening in your system and you're dealing with it, right? Just like how when I go and say, okay, there's validation, processing, and integration, right? You're going and saying, okay, pass the validation category, do the processing, and then integrate with some broker or an external resource or whatever the case may be. So I'm going to write a simple test in here. I'm going to go like this and say, okay, here's a fact. Here's my fact right here. Oh, gosh. Fact like this. And I'm going to go and say public async task should throw, check this out, throw validation exception. This is the first time you and I do this, so bear with me, right? So validation exception on remove, right? If ID is invalid and log it async. So I asked for a lot of things in here in that test. I'm setting the bar too high right in here. I'm basically going and saying, here's the deal. If the ID that is being passed in for this remove function is bad, I should throw a validation exception. Okay, so let's do this. Given, when, then. Okay, let's start with the inputs, just like we do. We're gonna go here and say GUID, and I'm gonna say invalid ID, right? That's GUID.empty, right? Let's
Mm.
call it invalid post ID here. Number one. Number two thing, what am I trying to do? The exceptions. So I should have something called invalid post exception. Oop. Yep, shortcuts now flying all over the place, and Teams is conflicting with Visual Studio, and Windows 7 is conflicting with. Anyway, so new invalid post exceptions. That's my post exception. And then I'm going to go and add. This guy is basically like a dictionary. I can go here and collect all the errors that could possibly happen within a particular request. It just so happens in our case that we have only one error, which is that the ID is invalid. Cool. So I'm going to go here and say add data. Here's what I expect. A key, which is the name of post.id. Watch this, post.id. Okay. And then the values here is ID is invalid. So this is basically a human readable kind of thing that basically says, oh, the ID that you actually passed in here is totally invalid. And because of that, I'm going to go and throw a validation exception. And this validation exception is basically going to have this error message in it. Any questions so far?
If my memory serves me right, does invalid post exception inherits from exception, the library that you use
Yes, that's
to
why it has
include
this.
the yeah
Yes, that's why it
the
has this
okay
great feature here. This is not outside the box. The native
yeah
exception doesn't give you that stuff, right? So if you go
yeah
into the implementation area, it's taken from that exception right here. And I had
yeah
to do it. It's not that I like kind of spinning up because, by the way, just letting you know, and something for the people watching us, spinning up a library, especially if it's open source, whether it's open source or not, if you publish a library out there and starts getting all these downloads. I think I'm hitting already almost 35, maybe 40,000 downloads, right? That's a lot of people, right?
mm,
It's a scary number. What that basically means is that now, so hear me out. When you publish a library out there or when you use a library, you're shaking hands with some other guy. You're basically saying, listen, man, I trust you so much as much of the amount of work and the criticality of the project that I'm going to be working with, right? I
mm,
trust you that your library will help me and support me, save some time, that will help me basically go and be able to um, simply complete my mission, my task without, yeah, 57,000. I lied. Okay, so there's a lot of people. Exception have had almost 2,494 downloads, right? And then there's a bunch of those that is already exceeding, like it's going up, which is
mm,
great. I mean, they're open source, they're test driven. Of course, you gotta trust it. It's a good library, right? I'm not just spinning something up and saying, hey, deal with it, and if it breaks, that's your problem, right? So when you download a NuGet library, you're shaking hands with a person, right? You're signing a contract with them. You're basically saying, I trust you to help me get the job done. This is why I always encourage people to sponsor open source projects and help these people. You don't have to sponsor them with money. You can just leave a nice word, tell them, hey, thank you so much, you're doing great. It does a lot. I notice like those, library maintainers, people that build these libraries, you just go and say, I really appreciate your hard work on that, and mean it and put authenticity into it. It does magic, right? Because we're human beings, right? We're not robots, right? So anyway, so why am I talking about this? Why was I talking about this? This library I had to build. It's not really I'm like an old man, just goes into side topics all the time. But this library I had to build it because I wanted to achieve something called problem detail. Problem detail. And the
Mm-hmm.
problem detail is based to standardize API communication, and not just that, take it all the way up to the UI, take it up to the next level. All right. Okay. So far, so good. So this is add data. This is perfect. And then now that this is the only error that I have, now I'm going to go and say expected post validation exception. Expected post validation exception. So I'm going to go here and say this is post validation exception. This is what I call the categorization aspect of this. So this is a local problem, the
Mm-hmm.
localization, and then there's the categorization. I have found out, again, back to the tri nature of everything, is that every service out there could throw one of three different types of exceptions. It's either validation or a dependency or a service exception, and there is a mixture, like a hybrid creature between validation and dependencies, that we call dependency validation exception. This was necessary because you could be calling a dependency downstream, but what's coming from that dependency is not exactly just an erroneous issue in the system itself. It's just something with your input that didn't quite, come through in the right way. Okay, so we have this stuff. Now I don't really have to do to mock responses or anything. Why do you think? Why do I not have to go, like, remember how last time we went and said, oh, just remember in the logic area, which is remove by ID. Do you remember how we had to mock the responses like this? Do you remember
Yeah.
that part? So how come I'm not doing it in here? Why do you think is the reason for that?
Well, I believe because you're not even going through the storage broker because you're already validating the ID.
You're gonna
Yeah.
cut the circuit, right? So
Yeah.
you're not gonna continue. You're just gonna go and say, sorry, structural validation have completed, and
Yeah.
we found out that your input sucks,
It
right? And we're
was
gonna,
it was
yeah.
structural, logical, and then
And then
the
dependency
exception.
or external, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
External. The external validation is when you go and say, let me
Mm.
go check if this guy actually exists. And we're gonna do that in this session. Not this session, maybe a couple of sessions from now, but we're gonna do that. Okay, let's let's go and do this. So this time I'm not really executing. I'm saving remove post by ID task. See, I'm not awaiting. Look at this. I'm not awaiting. I'm going and saying, hey, remove post by ID with an invalid post ID. And then take that function. This function is not being called yet. I just saved. It's a deferred execution. It didn't really run yet, right? And then I'm going to go up in here and say await. Watch this. Wait, let me give people the focus for dramatic effect. So here we go. And then here, await and then assert throws async. And I'm throwing what? A post validation exception. So I expect my function to throw an exception that is post validation, outer exception.
Okay.
So far, so good, right?
Yep.
Okay. The next thing I want to go and say, hey, make sure that my logging broker have actually logged an exception and an inner exception with these exact same details. So I'm going to go here and say it is, watch, it is same exception as, or same validation exception as, and I'm going to go here and say expected post validation exception, like this. So what that means, I can go here and say times once. So I'm basically going and saying that when this issue happened, we should log an exception with the exact same details as the one that I created in here. Not just that the exception is post validation. I also want to validate that this guy has the right details in it. If you go into this same validation exception, you will see here that I'm comparing the data.
Hmm.
So that little dictionary that little dictionary that I have, and we're gonna remove this one. We don't need that one anymore. I already upgraded my standard, but this is basically you going and saying same validation exception as. What that basically means is that validate not just the exception, not just the inner exception, but also the data inside that exception. So far, so good, right? The last thing I want to go and say, ideally, in the happy path scenario, I would have called the ultimate goal, I would have called this broker with remove or with delete. I don't even care about get by ID. It is
Yeah.
any. This is the part that makes some people a little bit, not comfortable. Times never. This is me saying if it wasn't for this exception, I would have called this delete post dependency. Not the one that's retrieved by ID because that's validation work. The remove post or delete post is the actual goal, ultimate goal of you. The last call you make in your function, basically, right? And then I'm going to go down here and say, well, what has been called first? Well, the logging broker has been called first, right? And then, what other brokers we have? Date time, and then the storage broker was not called, but it would be. And then the date time broker was not called, but it would be. This chronological order, Ricardo, is of utmost importance. Why is that? Because this chronological order basically tells you what are the things. It's embedded in it a chronological story. It says we called the logging broker, but if it wasn't for it, we would have called the storage broker. And if it wasn't for it, we
Yeah.
may or may not have been calling the date time broker. In your case here, we will never call the date time broker because this is a retrieve by ID. I'm not validating time or anything.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Visible confusion. Tell me what you got. Good? All good? Okay. So that's the
Yeah.
story. The test basically is going and saying, here's a bad ID, and when this bad ID gets passed in, I expect an invalid post exception to happen with something that points out that this ID sucks. And then I'm going to wrap that in post validation exception because this is a validation error. I'm going to make sure that this validation exception gets thrown, and I'm going to verify that my logging broker has the right outer and inner exception. And then at the end, I'm going to tell the story of, oh, if it wasn't for that, we would have continued with this, and then validate nobody's making any additional calls within your function. Okay. So now if I go and run this, let's run this guy. Control RT will do the trick as well. Here you go. Mhm. What happened to it? Let's see. Come on, man. Yeah, it says one failed. I don't know why it's not showing the actual little red light, green light. But here it is. This is the issue that we have. No, this one should remove post by ID. Let me see here. The method or operation is not implemented. Did we not? Should remove post by ID. Give me a second here. Remove post by ID. What is this thing tripping about? Give me a sec. I need to probably rebuild the world. Always run all the tests.
Yeah.
Always. I see some people run only the test that they're working, and I understand where this is coming from. In some really complicated, crappy systems out there, you just want to get out as soon as fast as possible. You're in the code, you just want to make it pass and just get out there. I don't want to fix anything else. I don't want anything to do with anything else. I just want to make sure that I get my job done. And I'm trying to make it really fun. The execution time of the test is part of the engineering experience. Anyway, this guy's failing right here. So it's basically saying, hey, we expected you to throw something. If you look at the message, we expected an exception to happen, but nothing has happened. So
Yeah.
that's a good failing test. There's a bad failing test. That's a good failing test. So let me commit that guy here. I'm going to go ahead and say fail. Do you want to try and make it pass, or do you want me to show you since this is the first time?
I can try.
Let's go. Let's go to town. Ain't nothing but a thing, one sky man. Let's go.
And what's the worst that can happen, right?
Yeah, nothing. It's just fun.
Yeah.
What's the worst that could happen? That's hilarious. All right, there you are. There he is. The man, the myth, the legend. Let's make it happen. Let's go.
All right. Trying to sync down the changes.
All right.
Okay. So it's validation. Remove by ID. No, it was retrieve by ID.
That's right. By the way, I love I don't know what you're doing with your fonts, but it's much simpler than the really glowing font in on my side. I will
Oh,
look it up. Mhm.
I've been tweaking a bit with Visual Studio. I
Oh, this
even
is
did
so nice. Yeah.
I even did a snippet with the given when and then.
Oh, really? Nice, nice.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, just make sure you don't automate everything. Keep us something to do.
uh, definitely, definitely. Okay, so now first, let's just run all the tests.
Yep, that's the guy right there.
All right.
It's good to hang out with you again, Ricardo. It's been a while.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
good
my
mini
apologies.
vacation. Oh,
Yeah,
no worries
yeah.
about it.
See, this 1.2 seconds is too much time. We're gonna have to optimize that, but we'll come back to it. Make it work, then make it pretty, then make it perfect, I guess. Make it fail, then make it pass, and then make it pretty, I guess. Shout out to my main man, Josh McCall. He always likes to say that. He's one of my friends. He basically says, "Oh, make it fail, then make it pass, or make it right. Make it work, then make it right, then make it pretty. Make it work, then make it right, then make it pretty. POC, standardize, and then really go the extra mile." Yeah, yeah,
I like that.
yeah.
Right, failing for the right reasons. All right,
Yeah. So what are we gonna do now?
all right. Let's see. So let's remove. Right. So we're trying to remove post my async. Oh,
Okay.
sorry about that. It would be control F12. There we go. Okay. So I guess at this point I would need to validate the maybe post.
Not yet.
Oh,
What are we throwing an exception on? Zoom out a little bit, just tiny bit. Look at yeah, see, what are you validating? What
right.
is it? Uh-huh.
The post ID. Right.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you a bad post ID. Before you even reach the maybe post, you should be able to throw an error for there. So let's start with that.
So I believe we already have a method called validate post. Right.
Are we validating a post or are we validating a post ID?
Oh, right, right, right. Sorry.
Yeah.
So
So we need a new method, it seems.
yeah. All right. See. Let me see what you've been using here.
Hmm.
We go and see this one.
Hmm.
Validate post is not no.
Uh-huh.
Validate. So we kind of want the same kind of structure for this, but for
Hmm.
I guess for any type of input that's
Yeah,
coming
so
in.
so we only have one rule here that we need to work with, which is the ID, right? Why don't we create a new method? Let's call it validate post ID.
Okay. So I could put it anywhere or
Put it under the validate post, not anywhere. It has to be, the methods that get used outside of the class file that you're in, they take precedence in terms of order. Mhm. Yeah.
it was validate
Post ID.
post
Yep.
and then subject post.
Hmm. Do you see that line at the top that says validate, and then it has one rule in it if you scroll up just one tiny bit? Take that line from line 8, take line 18 and line 19, and I'll explain what they're doing in a second. Uh-huh. Yep, and then instead of the comma, put another parentheses and just do a semicolon, and then replace post.id with post ID. So just take away the dot, basically. Right. So what is this guy doing? This
Yeah.
validate guy is basically a business rules engine. It takes a bunch of rules, no matter how many they are. And maybe the next session I will explain that to you in detail. But what this validate method is, right click on that method and just go to definition. It's within the same file, but it'll no the validate, not is invalid, the validate.
Oh, the validate. Okay.
Yeah, go inside of that method. Yeah. Look what this method does. It's part of this exception kind of thing. You're basically going and saying, give me params, infinite params, like number of rules, right? And these rules, I'm gonna run all of these rules and collect the ones that fail and put them in a report for you, right? So this is, you're passing in a bunch of rules, infinite number of rules. It's params, right? It takes any rules. And every rule is saying, here's the parameter that I am examining against, right? So scroll to the left a little bit. So every rule in here is basically a function that you're passing in that returns a dynamic rule. And this rule has a condition and a message. The condition is whether the rule have been violated or not, right? And the message is basically the human readable message that is collected in that report, right? This is a very brand new thing. It's like 2 months old or something, right? Maybe a lot less than that. What this guy is doing is that saying, okay, let's create a post exception. And every time there is an issue, let's add it to that post exception, assert data list. Because the data piece in any exception is basically a dictionary, a generic dictionary. So we're basically appending. Why are we asserting? Because sometimes the same parameter could have multiple errors. Like sometimes your created date is invalid and it's not recent. It's not just invalid, it's also not recent. Like the structure of it is basically 1 year 1, that's default, and it's also not recent. So this guy collects a bunch of them. It collects a bunch of these issues. Okay, and then if you scroll down a little bit, it goes and says, if my report has errors in it, then throw an exception.
So something
So
like this one.
yeah, so this guy is gonna throw an invalid post exception, right?
You're
If
right.
it
Yeah.
if it throws an invalid post exception, what do we need to do with it?
Um, when we need to log it.
We need to log it, but we need to categorize it first. We need to put it in a
Oh, right. Yeah.
validation exception.
Right.
So let's go to the exception aspect of our service, of our post service real quick.
So just expand this a bit.
Oh, you don't have your, click on tools options and type active. Options, tools options, and then type active. Just type the word active. Okay, click on general. And then you should have, scroll down a little bit in the right side.
Yeah. It's not scrolling down for
It's
some
not
reason.
scrolling. It's weird.
Yeah.
What?
1 second.
Huh. Weird.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like it's grayed out or something.
Okay, that's okay. Uh, type track. Track.
Track.
Yeah, click general again. Nothing? How about general and text editor? Yeah, it's in the other one. Click on general again. Maybe it'll. Yeah, click that track active item in Solution Explorer. Second one. Yep, click OK.
All right.
Okay, now when you go into a file, it will select it in the solution. Like go click on that file that you're in. No. The file, the code, the actual code.
Oh,
Yep. Now look at your solution explorer again. Look, it selects the file that you're in automatically.
whoa.
Hells yeah. Okay, now go to the go to the exceptions piece.
That's amazing.
Oh yeah. So that's the best thing about pair programming. I love to show people these tricks. I'm a trickster at the end of the day. So forget about software engineering. Just walking around making tricks for engineers. Okay, so here's the deal. We already have a delegate here that says allow returning, take care of the exceptions that come out of a function that returns a post, right? Which matches the description of your function. Do you see that delegate that says returning value task post?
Yeah.
So that means you can go back to your function, the remove post by ID, real quick. And just wrap that up in a try catch, just like this function. Just wrap it in a try catch, exactly the same way.
Oh, so try to do this one.
Yeah, literally
Oh,
exactly the same way. Put a
all
fat
right.
arrow next to the function itself and then do a try catch. This is called exception noise handling. Sorry, exception noise canceling. Yep, go for it. Try catch.
And then we do the async.
hmm Lowercase async and then remove it from the other one. Remove that async from the function after you're done with this one. Oh,
1 second. I was,
yes. You need a squiggly after the fat arrow.
oh, okay.
Yeah. Yikes.
This one.
Also, if you do shift tab, it will go back by one. Now you just need to take the async from line 43. Perfect. Okay, so that's that part. Now we want to call the function that does the validation still, right? That's
Mhm.
that. Let's call that function.
So validate post ID.
hmm And then
Pass in the
since the function that's underneath it is a two-liner, just take a new line. That's it. Run the test again. See what happens.
Alright. Yeah, that's right.
Here we go.
I'm still amazed about that trick, by the way.
Oh yeah. Oh, I got more. Just wait. It's productivity tricks. Visual Studio has over 1 million lines of code. It has a lot of tricks. It's full of
Yeah.
tricks. And it's built by people who actually truly like passionate and they actually love code. They care about the engineering experience so much. Optimization, the work on making sure you get what you need fast. This whole autocomplete copilot thing is just the next big thing, right? They're basically engaging AI to help you write code. And it's scary good. It's not just good, it's scary good. Okay, this guy's still failing. What is it saying? Double click on that guy. It's saying the logging broker is not happy, right? All right. Put the name
Yeah.
of that test on WIP and just send it over to me so I can look
All
into it.
right.
Because
So you want,
you did everything right. I'm just trying to see why. I may have done something that's not correct in my test. We'll see.
so
WIP.
WIP.
WIP all upperkeys. Yep. That means I did everything but I need help basically. So yeah, drop that guy and do push.
All right.
Okay. My turn. So here's the deal, my friend. I'm gonna go pull this over like this.
So technically, the validation methods should have already done its work on.
Right, right. Let's
Right.
see what,
Uh,
yeah, let's see what the deal you is. Okay. Did my Visual Studio froze? Let's see.
um. Wait a minute.
No, there it is.
Uh,
No, we're fine. It's just glitching. Okay. So let me run this test again and let me see what happens. Okay, so here's the guy, and this guy's saying ID is invalid, right? Let's go up in here and let's go and say let's see what the deal is. Post validation ID is invalid, and if I go into remove by ID, I go into validate post ID. You did validate, you did is invalid. It takes you ID. Oh, ID is required, not is invalid. ID is required. Okay, that's so it's a problem in my test that says, hey, the ID that you passed in. Okay, so now let me run this again. I think that will make the test pass. Here you go.
Oh, because they have to be the same as
You have to be
the
exactly the
message.
same. They have to be exactly the same. So now
Okay.
this guy is a pass. So you did mostly the stuff. It just was a bad test. The test that I wrote was not correct. And to be honest with you, I'm gonna start thinking about that required versus if you pass in an empty ID, that basically means you didn't fill anything. It just kind of
Yeah.
so that's why we say ID is required. Here's what I want from you before we wrap up our session. I'm sorry for the rush, but here's the deal. The one thing I want from you, Ricardo, is to basic look into two things. The try catch. How does this try catch works? My YouTube channel is full of details around. If you look at my series with Sally, I just talked about that very recently. Exception noise handling in C sharp. Look at how we passed in a function to a function, something that some people call monad or something. We passed in a function to a function, and then we executed this function so we can abstract away the details. See that this function has all the exceptions being handled, but what you're seeing is just the logic.
Hmm.
So you're basically, excuse me, abstracting away all the bad code, the noisy code, canceling that noise, and you're focusing only on the things that matter the most. Because exceptions are just that, things that exceptionally happen every once in a blue moon, hopefully, if your system is healthy, which means it shouldn't be in your face all the time, right? The thing that should be in your face are the things that execute all the time. So we always validate, we always call this, we always call that, right? Or most of the time. So these are the things that we propagate to the top of this, and we're leveraging some crazy stuff like partial classes. No other programming language that I know of can offer you partial classes, out of the box, but this is where we stand. So anyway, my friend, this should technically be it for today. We're gonna start thinking about, other validation exceptions like not found exception. Like when we go retrieve that post and the ID doesn't match anything, what should we do, right? It must not found. It's not a good match for something. So we'll look into all of this tomorrow, hopefully next time, and we will start kind of thinking about how to kind of complete that feature. At the beginning, it gets a little bit slower because you're kind of finding your way and all that kind of stuff. But very, very soon, my friend, things are going to get really, really fast. You wouldn't even say hi to me anymore. You'll be like, just tell me what needs to happen, Hassan. You and your BS. I don't want to hear your stories, you old man. I'm already taking over. All right, my friend. The other thing is, just like I said to you, just a quick thing for you. The You already are on GitHub. You're already looking at Git file and all that kind of stuff. I just added something very interesting, something new today, which is something called the grade. And the grade of an engineer is basically how recent their contributions are. So you'll see something here called grade, right? S10 is a bad, bad grade. It basically means I went offline for a very long time, and now I'm back up trying to build up my skills back in the open source contributions, right? If you keep this grade at A1 or A plus at all times, that means you're always contributing. You're recent, right? You see a lot of people. Have you ever run into someone in the software engineering industry that says, I am a principal engineer? And if you sit down and talk to them, they're dinosaurs. They don't know
Yeah.
anything, right? Why is that? Because they stopped investing and they stopped working on their skill set, right? If they're under this get file will say, oh, sorry, you're a Z30. Z30 meaning you stopped trying long time ago, right? I'll explain this more to you. I'm interested to see for you to take a look at it and tell me what you think of it. The most important thing also about this is that it also tells you what your when you pair, it'll tell you how much percentage of your work is actually mentoring and pairing and seeking knowledge and learning from other people. So I think after we merge this PR, you're going to start seeing these percentages going up. This is me systematically, intentionally investing in your growth and in your craft, and I hope that's a good thing for you. All right, my
Yeah,
friend, are we good?
yeah, we're
Thank you
good.
so much for showing up today, and thank you for your patience with my crazy schedule. And I look forward to working with you tomorrow. You take care, my friend. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in another video. Take care.